Konnichiwa! Today we're going to be looking at the game that defined the PlayStation. Wow, this is really going to split opinion. Game on! So this is going to be a tough one. What is the game that defined the PlayStation? Before we get into this stack of games here, I want to set a couple of ground rules here. The game that defines the PlayStation 1 in this video is my choice, and it's going to be based on a number of criteria. Graphics, games mechanics, technical implementation, total sales, how commercially and critically successful it was, and lastly, for me, the most important thing about the game that defined the PlayStation 1 is the legacy it left. How it defined not only the PlayStation 1, but went on to define the PlayStation 2 and even the PlayStation 3. So let's get into this stack of games. Let's start with honorable mentions before we get into the top 5. Silent Hill, Alien Trilogy, the entire Street Fighter series, the Vandal Heart series, Destruction Derby 1 and 2, Front Mission 3, Wild Arms, Crash Bandicoot, the technically stunning Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, and of course, Driver. Now it starts to get really hard. Just missing my top 5, I had the Tekken series and specifically Tekken 3. This game was absolutely stunning on the PlayStation 1 and really put it on the map. Wipeout is probably my favorite series on the PlayStation 1. I think I got every single Wipeout that was released in the PAL territory, so even the special edition there. Wipeout was a cultural phenomenon. For the PlayStation 1, it was in nightclubs, it made the PlayStation look cool, it was a really amazing game, and it's a series that got better and better and better as the PlayStation 1 went on. But it kind of just misses my top 5. Ridge Racer made a stunning leap from arcade onto the PlayStation 1 and showed how arcade quality graphics and gameplay could be enjoyed at home. From Ridge Racer to Revolution to Rage Racer to Ridge Racer Type 4, Ridge Racer's visuals just got better and better with every single release, whilst maintaining that amazing arcade control and drift mechanic. This is where things start to get serious and perhaps a little controversial as we start heading towards the most definitive game on PlayStation 1. Here we go, Resident Evil. Next up, it's Tomb Raider. The original Gran Turismo sold 10.85 million copies. So for this next game, I really struggled because it really was between this game that I'm about to show you and then the game that I eventually chose as my game that defined the PlayStation 1. The gameplay in this, gameplay mechanic, the graphic, the originality of it, the legacy it's left for PlayStation is undisputable. It's a truly fantastic game, and that is Metal Gear Solid. Now, Metal Gear Solid was originally being developed for the 3DO, but with the demise of the 3DO, Konami moved it to the PlayStation 1. And thank God they did. This game is absolutely stunning. It sold 7 million copies. The game is credited with influencing games like Assassin's Creed and Splinter Cell. And it's easy to see why. The cinematic experience that the team delivered on was truly amazing. Nothing like it before on any other platform. Even the gameplay mechanics, where you had to fight Psycho Mantis and then switch to a different controller, or look on the back of the box to find certain clues. It was really stunning. The way that the team interacted with you as the player was great. Storytelling was fantastic. Visuals were amazing. It was one of the most stunning games on the PlayStation 1, and for me, had an unbelievable legacy. This game came so close as being my choice for the definitive game on PlayStation 1. So what's the game for me that defined the PlayStation 1? Well, for some it's no surprise, it's Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII sold 9.8 million copies and is widely recognized for taking RPGs and JRPGs mainstream. At the time, Final Fantasy VII was the most expensive game in development, $45 million to make and reported $100 million to market. Now, while Squaresoft were assured of Final Fantasy VII's success in Japan, they weren't so sure of how successful it would be for a Western market. So Sony made a deal for the publishing rights for Europe and America and haven't looked back since. Originally, Final Fantasy was an IP that was exclusive to the Nintendo platform, but Square chose to move to Sony's new PlayStation after Nintendo renegaded on a contract with Sony to make a CD-based Nintendo console. Instead, Nintendo opted for cartridges, which wasn't in line with Square's aspirations for Final Fantasy VII. When the game was being developed for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, the original story that was penned was a detective story. Square made a huge investment into the project, investing an estimated $21 million on Silicon Onyx supercomputers and software like Softimage 3D, Power Animator and N-World. One of the amazing technical feats in the game saw FMV rendered sequences blend in seamlessly with real-time 3D gameplay. This was an amazing achievement, and this was achieved by overlaying 2D images with the ending of the FMV rendered sequences. Now, Final Fantasy VII, like most games on the PlayStation, had staggered release dates, coming out first in Japan, then in the US and then in Europe. Now, for most of us this was a pain, especially if you're in the UK, as you'd wait months, even years for your favourite game to come along. But in the case of Final Fantasy VII, this turned out to be a benefit, as the super bosses Ruby and Emerald Weapon were actually added to the North American and European releases. Final Fantasy helped define the PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 2, and at one point even the PlayStation 3, but that didn't go so well. It's a stunningly presented game with amazing visuals. It took a much beloved series from 2D to 3D, introduced amazing cinematics into the game. They have fantastic core mechanics in there, a 3D world to traverse. It was an unbelievable experience and still massively loved by fans. In fact, a remake has been on the cards for Final Fantasy VII pretty much since Final Fantasy VIII came out. It is probably one of the most loved RPGs and probably the biggest coup that Sony could have pulled off after Nintendo walked out on them and the PlayStation prototype. So there you go, Final Fantasy VII, my definitive game for the PlayStation 1. Let me know in the comments below if you agree with me that Final Fantasy VII is the definitive game for PlayStation 1. And if not, let me know what your definitive game for PlayStation 1 was. If you want more retro PlayStation goodness from an old PlayStation game developer, then make sure you click on my little pixel head below. And if you're a PlayStation fan, why don't you check out my video here, where I look at the best, worst PlayStation 2 games that you can buy.